Hello, and thanks for coming to watch another video from Steve Adventure Academy. So, as you can imagine, at the Academy we get lots and lots of questions, and of course I'm a one-take wonder, so there won't be any video editing of me adjusting that camera just then. But we get a lot of questions about knives, knife collections, that sort of thing, and we're going to try to avoid a bunch of buzzwords and just get right into it. So, I'm going to go through the chronology of what turned out to be a knife collection. Now, when it comes to being a knife collector, that was never my intention. I didn't set out to be a knife collector. It never really occurred to me that I would ever be a knife collector. Very much like I had never really decided to become a Trekkie. But then a friend of mine said, well, you're a Trekkie. And I said, well, how do you define that? So they went on to say, well, have you seen all the shows? Yes, seen all the shows. Have you seen all the movies? Yes, have you seen all the movies? Did you ever own a Klingon dictionary? Yes, I owned a Klingon dictionary. He said, well, you're a Trekkie. Well, the same thing turned into my life collection. I started off innocently, like every little kid does, looking to have something sharp in their pocket because their dad looks cool when they have one. And let's face it, opening bags and stuff with your teeth is just very Homer Simpson. But then, you'd get one, and then you need something else to do another job, and pretty soon it gets to be a little bit silly. So, in the interest of being a little bit silly, we'll start right here at the beginning. So when I was about 10 years old, I found this one on the road. The patina is amazing. Personally, I think if you could make a knife like that by leaving it on the road and driving over it strategically, and then putting it in your father's pocket because you're too young to own a knife for, 20 years, then you could come up with a pretty nice knife. Now you can see that this one's been modified in many ways, and not including the fact, not the least of which being that the tip has been ground down quite a bit, but that just says that it's been much loved. I couldn't tell you for sure if this is a Wenger or a Victorinox, except to say that the blade steel is very stiff, and so it's very much more likely to be a Victorinox rather than a Wenger. We'll circle back to that here in a minute. So that was the first knife I didn't own. My father said when I got to be responsible enough to own a pocket knife, then he would give it back to me. I think I was in my mid-30s when that took place, so thank goodness I was finally responsible enough to carry a pocket knife. I don't actually carry that one anymore because I realized one day that if I lost it, I would be much too emotionally involved for that to be healthy, so I went into what began to be a collection. So after that knife, I bought this one when I was a child again still. It was probably teen in my age, I couldn't say for sure, but saved up my money and bought myself what we all lovingly know to be the Rambo knife. This one has a fairly impractical blade shape, but it has definitely done a lot of rabbits and partridge. You can also see that it has the saw back that has no use at all, except if you really wanted to call it jimping, the most uncomfortable jimping in the world. It does not cut wood in any way. It barely scores it. This one's made out of 440 stainless from Japan. It's harder than nails. It has reasonable edge retention, but sharpening it is like trying to sharpen a railway track. It may actually be made out of surplus railway track. But it had a compass in the pommel, which used to work, up until the point all the matches in the handle went off one day when it fell off the bed and hit the floor, and the heat damaged the compass. But there is still the matches you would expect inside. And then someone gave me this little guy when the sharpening stone broke in half and was useless insofar as the steel was so much harder than it just made sand. This little guy has done a lot of the little whittling tasks that you wouldn't want to use a big knife for because it's impossible to resharpen. So this one here is kind of fun. I couldn't say for sure where it came from, except that it used to say Monroe shocks on the front and fits very nicely into the front of that scabbard. So that one's a very time-sensitive piece. I hardly use it anymore because, again, it's impossible to put the edge back on. Then I had a great uncle who decided that, every teenage young adult needs a big knife, so he gave me this one. This one came all the way from with him back from Colombia when he was doing some relief work there. It's made out of metal. It's serialized, If anyone has any more information about that you'd like to share, I'd be delighted to hear it. But this is a substantial Colombian machete. This actually has fantastic edge retention. It's an incredible tool to use. It really clears brush aggressively. It's not got a wide cross section, so it slices very well. And it was ground across the spine up to about this point. So I do keep it sharp there, and that way you can swing from side to side when you're clearing brush, and it just knocks everything down, even the tall grass. So you don't have to swing and then swing and then swing. You can just wave it back and forth like a crazy person might. But it does great work, and the hand-carved leather scabbard is quite nice, considering it was probably made by hand by a gently skilled labor. And that was probably done in the late 50s, early 60s. Back when, if it was made of steel, that was okay. You didn't have to have numbers. Subsequent to that, I lost a Swiss Army knife. If anyone finds a Swiss Army knife out in the world where this particular tool has a weld mark on the back, and it's the a camper, I believe it is, with the scissors inside and the saw, I'd love to have it back. It was lost in a robbery with violence. Whoops. Yeah, don't carry your pocket knife in your pocket if you're going to get swarmed, I think they called it in the 90s. But just a great tool. It didn't come with the little screwdriver to do your glasses and what have you, but you definitely want to buy that attachment. And somehow I've managed to lose the tweezers again. I think that's the third or fourth set of tweezers. Much like my grandfather's axe, 3 heads and 4 handles later, still in the family. After that, I needed something a little bit to hopefully replace the blue Swiss Army knife that we looked at before, so I bought one, something that I wouldn't feel too badly if I lost. This one is a Wenger. You can tell right away because the blade steel is much softer. It's got more spring. I guess it isn't necessarily softer, but it's got more spring to it. I generally prefer the Victorinox blades for that reason. The Victorinox blades also have better edge retention. This one's been ground down a little bit because I wanted to have that slicey feel of the used one that we looked at before. And I was working at a company that did engraving. I worked for Things Engraved and Personally Yours. I was managing there for a little while. It was great fun. And they told me that it's impossible to engrave on the skin of these knives, and of course I asked, am I not allowed or is it impossible? They said, well, you're not allowed because it's impossible. Well, clearly it's not. It's just not desirable because it's really difficult. Subsequent to that, now I should say that I've been in love with cold steel knives since Lynn Thompson came out with his American Tanto. It was released originally, I believe, in the Recon Tanto with the brass hardware and the really nice steel and the hollow grind. It was beautiful. So I've always been a fan of cold steel, but you know, I was on a budget and thinking that they were probably too expensive to get. So eventually we started playing paintball a lot, particularly with my son and my brother, and I thought to myself, you know what, I need a knife for paintball. So I bought a cold steel, my first cold steel. Woo! Plastic. I'm sure there's a fancier name for it, but this is their trainer. It's very flexible. It has no sharp edges whatsoever. But I'll tell you, this thing has dispatched many a player on the paintball field. Much nicer than barrel tagging people or walking up to them telling them they're out, because then they start to question you and the jibber jabber alerts their friends and you get shot up real good. But when you touch somebody with the knife and whisper to them you're out, guess what? They just walk off the field. Safety first. So, cold steel trainer. And of course I had to make a camouflage scabbard for it out of duct tape and cardboard because something more elaborate would just be silly. Subsequent to that, I was able to find a knife. I knew I needed a belt knife because we were getting more and more into the survival training. And so, why not indulge yourself and get yourself a cold steel GI Tanto? These are a great knife, bang for your buck. They're made out of 1055. They come with a thrower and grind, so you're definitely going to, if you're going to bushcraft it like me, you're definitely going to want to modify the edge. So you'll see that I've relaxed my edge, laid it way back. What I like about the throwing capable steel is that it's got real great impact resistance, and so I felt pretty confident making this modification, and technically it's a Scandi grind now. It's almost a Scandi, it's convex for sure, all the way up to the tip. I also sharpened the spine a little bit, mostly because it throws wicked nice sparks, and this does not have a 90-degree spine. So I don't mind sacrificing this edge to throw sparks from a ferrocerium rod. Originally, I didn't like the handle because it didn't index, so you'll see that there are no knots on the back, but there are knots on the front, so that in the dark, because the hilt is ambi, the handle was also nondescript and mostly ambi except for this cutout. This way you know for sure which way you're holding it in the pitch black. Also gutting the paracord, I wish I had done right from the beginning. I carried it for 2 or 3 years with the guts in, and the handle was just a little bit too big. But gutting the paracord and then dipping it in boiling water for 2 minutes really tightened things up and made the grip much nicer. You can see my fingers just about touch like they do on most of my other more comfortable knives. Great piece of steel. And of course 20 feet of 75-pound test camouflage style rope for whatever ails you. It's 50% on there because, let's tell the truth, it's 50% on there because it looks cool. It's 50% on there because now I can say I got 20 feet of rope, but it doesn't start a fire and you can't eat it. You can't sleep under it, but you could make a wicked nice shelter with it. And of course these are Securex. Little tip, a shout out to Cedric and Ada. This is not the knife lab, but in the knife lab they discovered that you would have to withdraw the knife from the scabbard 100 times before you notice a paper cutting difference. So yes, Securex does, in his opinion, dull the knife, but I'm not going to pull this knife in and out 100 times and then go to use it. So I don't even know why that's a point. But I thought I would bring it up because someone's going to say, oh, does the Securex sheath dull the knife? Yeah, after 100 withdraws, dragging it across the scabbard aggressively, absolutely it does. But anyway, so I've been carrying that for years. Really enjoy the knife, particularly after the edge mods. I'll often say that if you wouldn't buy a car that you had to make this kind of modifications to have it work. So maybe I didn't like this knife, and now I really do. But it's a great starting point. And dollar for dollar, I don't think that there is a... Am I going to go that far? Maybe. Dollar for dollar, I would suggest that this might be one of the best tanto-tipped knives on the market. Feel free to disagree. That's what the internet's for, right? Anyway, so I decided that after that I might get into throwing, and frankly, during this period I was EDCing SOG. I had a lot of SOG knives, and so when I was working at Cabela's, I had the opportunity to buy a set of SOG throwers that came back damaged. This is the second set. The first set had the word SOG laser cut out of the handles, and they were notorious for breaking because of the way the heat treat interacted with the SOG name relief. So we threw them, we learned a lot, taught a lot of people how to throw knives with those knives. They took a lot of abuse. They went ding and flew into the ditch more than they stuck in the wood, let's be honest. So they were, I just wore them out. One broke, then the second one failed the next day, and SOG was amazing. I did have to send them to Washington, so little tip, SOG's warranty is fantastic if you're willing to ship your stuff to Washington, and it can make it back across the border. But these are the replacements. They are better heat treated. The relief in the handles is much nicer. They came with a bunch of paracord, which I just added to my collection because these particular knives come out of your hand much nicer without the paracord. Great teaching tool. They're not heavy. They're not going to be hard on your shoulder. I can't help but recommend those dollar for dollar. Subsequent to that, I was still working at Cabela's where we were selling the cold steel True Flights. This one, as you can see, has got some wear and tear on it. The tip was damaged. I'll compare it to my second, and you can see how I repaired the tip. These are, well, I've thrown a lot of knives now, a lot of different shapes, and these are by far my favorite. They're just very straightforward. With the paracord on, it gives you the ability to hold the much heavier knife than the SOG. So you can practice the throwing motion without losing the steel. The other thing I like about these, they're crazy bushcraftable. So it's just a nice straight blade with a clip point, or a spear point, I guess you would say. And the 1055 will take a nice edge. I throw sharp knives, which I'm sure is not correct, but I don't really understand owning a knife that isn't sharp. I would, if I wasn't going to throw a sharp knife, I would throw sticks, rocks, or chinchillas. Although chinchillas are much more expensive than these were. I really like how these work. They have a reputation for lasting for years, and frankly, not only do they come out of the hand really nicely, they deliver great amounts of energy. So if you're using non-traditional targets, like foam Angry Birds characters cut in half, which make great throwing targets, the kids really have a good time throwing at the pigs, or stuffed animals, that sort of thing. These are really going to stick. And they make a great thunk when they impact. And if you were carrying a pair of these on your belt, you wouldn't be stuck in the woods, that's for sure. A friend of mine, we had discussed creating a scabbard for throwers, and a friend of mine working at Cabela's, Eric Fisher of Fisher Custom Leather. You should absolutely check out his work. He is not only is he an artist, but he is an engineer. So all of his scabbards, including the one that we made together, was CAD designed, and then all of the pattern CAD created and printed, and then we cut everything out. So I think you'll agree that the scabbard is, if nothing else, ridiculous. 7 layers of leather, all hand dyed, hand stitched, a hand carved cold steel logo on the front. The scabbard is easily worth more than the 2 throwers combined. It's just a superior piece of work. It's so much fun to carry these 2 throwers in this conversation piece that I could never have done without the complete attention and the magnificent tutelage of Eric Fisher from Fisher Custom Leather. It's just silly. There was some discussion. Eric got interested in the project, well, because I asked him, but mostly I think he was intrigued by the idea of creating a scabbard that was 7 layers of stacked leather, because frankly I've never seen it done, and neither had he before this. So super fun. While teaching someone to throw with these SOG throwers, which are just SOGs, and these fantastic cold steel, one of my students was kind enough to bring his True Balance. I don't remember what this one is. This is the big one. This is a great fun thrower. Now you can see that I put it away wet. One of the things that I like about 1095 steel is that it takes its own patina. Now that polishes right off. Now you also notice that the edge grind has been altered if you're familiar with these throwers at all. This is a monster. Delivers great amounts of energy. So much so that if I'm throwing it, and I don't throw hard, but if I throw badly, because I do throw badly, the handle will stick into the butt of wood as much as the tip does. Although the tip, you can see, is much superior. I was carrying this in the woods for fun and just curious about how throwers might function in the bush. I got a lot of questions about it, so I started carrying throwers in the bush to see whether or not they would be useful. This is a great brush clearing tool. At the same time, I owned a SOG a SOG, not a hatchet, but they're tomahawks. This is, with the edge grind modded ever so slightly, this is a more effective brush clearer than my SOG. It has fewer moving parts. It has only one fastener, which is this melted knot on the paracord. I did find that this thrower was so heavy that adding the paracord to your throwing grip was pretty well necessary, only because if the neighbor's cat runs in front of the target and you're in the midst of launching this missile, there's no way you were going to hold on to it. It would just come out of your hand. Frankly, in some cases it would come out of your hand before you were ready to release it, so it would fly over the target or just not even make it to the target because you just couldn't hold on to all of this steel. So adding the paracord in this fashion really helped. So I just put it through the loop, wound the handle the way one might normally, and then put the knot at the top so that it still releases nicely rather than having the knot at the bottom. And frankly, you're going to have to you're going to double boil the paracord on these because the paracord is on the slope and only secured at the one end. So, and then of course, because I was so successful with all of this help, I thought, you know what, maybe I could make a scabbard out of cheap leftover leather that I was gifted in a really hideous color myself. Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah. Making a scabbard at someone else's shop with them holding your hand basically the entire way is much superior to trying to do it yourself. Right after I was gifted that thrower, as payment from that student who was just grateful, and I hadn't ever asked for payment, but I liked the thrower so much, and he had a couple, and he liked throwing once we were able to get his distances and release fixed, that he gave it to me. So I'm super blessed to own this thrower. I would never have spent the money on it, but owning it now, I wish I had 3 or 6 or 10, because you really can't have too much fun with these things. And like I said, it's a more effective brush clearing job than my SOG Tomahawk was. You won't see that in my collection. I've found someone who liked it better than I did, and they were lucky and nice enough to take it away from me. I do have still a SOG in my collection, another one that I got while I was at Cabela's, and everyone needs a car knife, particularly in this part of the world, the eastern woodlands, because it's just nice to know that there's something in the trunk that you could make a fire with or create a shelter. This is classic SOG insofar, in my mind at least, because it's tacked cool. This hooky thing on the back has no purpose other than aesthetics. It has a ridiculous amount of jimping here. I have no idea whose thumb or skin, maybe Andre the Giant's skin would have been thick enough to deal with that. If you're an alligator, you probably have thumbs that are strong enough to deal with that kind of jimping. And of course the reach for it is crazy because of the way the handle's made. The pommel is also great for breaking stuff, smashing stuff, and super gritty. This is made out of steel. I think it's their 8CR13 or something of that nature. The heat treat's not bad. It does take a really nice edge, which does not last